In a quaint diner, siblings Joseph and Sydney convene after a significant time apart. Previously, they had executed a robbery that yielded $7 million, which Joseph now carries in a sizable bag. They engage in a brief discussion regarding their forthcoming plans. Sydney requires the funds to settle her debts and support her daughter, Steph. She is determined to rectify her past mistakes, feeling remorse for not being the mother she ought to have been. However, their immediate priority is to find a secure hiding place to evade capture. Joseph suggests he knows an ideal location, but just then, the wail of a police siren pierces the air outside, prompting them to flee into the woods. They quickly change their attire, discarding their old clothes into a nearby swamp. Joseph mentions that a friend has offered them refuge in her secluded country house, a place long forgotten by others. As they navigate through a cornfield, they hear gunfire and approach the house with caution. To their astonishment, they find a car parked outside, and three individuals are entertaining themselves by shooting at empty bottles with rifles. Sydney attempts to confront the miscreants, but her shotgun fails to intimidate them. However, when Joseph appears from the opposite side, the trio hastily retreats. The brother urges them to hurry as they enter the seemingly vacant house. Joseph quickly spots a large clock, and the siblings proceed to explore the interior, observing the disarray and general neglect. At that moment, the sound of police sirens reaches their ears again. Sydney proposes that they flee, but Joseph directs her attention to a door leading to a pantry, declaring it to be precisely what they need. He then dashes to the clock on the ground floor and begins to manipulate its hands in a specific sequence. Sydney follows suit with the other clocks, and as they all begin to chime, the two of them enter the pantry and shut the door behind them. Thunder rumbles and lightning illuminates the sky above the house. At that moment, Joseph retrieves a small notebook and instructs his sister to dial a particular number on the antique telephone located in the room, telling her to hang up immediately after reciting the necessary words. Outside, the voices of police officers searching for them can be heard. Sydney dials the number, speaks a few words, and promptly hangs up. After a period of darkness and silence, Joseph opens the door, and they step outside to find the area deserted. The house appears tidy and inviting, everything in order, and the clocks have once again ceased to tick. Following the instructions, Joseph winds the clock in the living room. Sydney is astonished that they have successfully managed to reach this point and are now safe. However, Joseph reminds her that they must remain there for a minimum of 14 days, which does not seem overly challenging. The refrigerator is stocked with food and beverages, and there is a collection of discs on the table to keep them entertained. On the first day, they take the opportunity to rest. Joseph goes for walks to inspect the surroundings while Sydney enjoys a bath and tries on some old dresses she discovers in the closet. On the second day, they prepare dinner and spend time conversing on the porch. During the day, they count their loot and strategize on how and where to spend it. Sydney feels a pang of longing for her daughter as she gazes at her photograph but reassures herself that soon this situation will be resolved, allowing them to live without any needs. They examine the portraits adorning the walls of the house and practice their shooting skills, both demonstrating considerable proficiency with the rifles equipped with scopes. As the 13 days pass, one evening, Sydney discusses with her brother the worth of certain items stored in the peculiar house. For instance, she notes that a bullhook is quite valuable, yet modern individuals often lack knowledge of its purpose. Suddenly, she shifts the conversation to their sibling relationship, expressing that her brother feels he has not shown her enough affection, which now causes him distress. In contrast, Sydney believes her life has not been too unfortunate, as she has a daughter. Nevertheless, her brother vows to do everything in his power to make amends. Sydney inquires about his female friend who provided them with such an enchanting hideaway, but Joseph is unable to clarify her identity or the nature of her residence. He confesses that the woman had merely given him her notebook out of compassion. Suddenly, Sydney recalls their parents. She remembers their mother, while Joseph thinks of their father. Together, they reminisce about how their mother used to play the piano, but Sydney's most vivid memory is of a song she once heard on a stereo system. Although she cannot recall its title, she begins to hum the familiar melody and then abruptly requests Joseph to take her back to her daughter. At last, the moment arrives for them to return home. Sydney organizes their surroundings while Joseph prepares their bags and incinerates the leftover refuse. However, as they approach the pantry door, they discover it has been boarded up. Inscribed on a plank are words directing them to an old mill nearby. Overwhelmed, Sydney breaks down and runs toward the mill, with her brother following closely behind to soothe her. They start to investigate the site and uncover church pews in the basement. Soon, their flashlight beam illuminates a decaying body, and a warning carved on a stand reveals that they are trapped in a time loop, accompanied by an invitation to sign beneath the message if they comprehend and are willing to comply. Sydney adamantly refuses to do so and flees. She is eager to flee the house, but as she ventures into the field, she suddenly becomes unwell and vomits blood. It dawns on her that she cannot escape the confines that bind them. Her brother swiftly pulls her back to safety. Sydney regains her senses but struggles to comprehend the situation. Overcome with despair, she weeps as memories of her daughter flood her mind. Her brother reveals that the body found at the mill belongs to the very person who had provided him refuge there. He recognized her by the family heirloom clock. The siblings ponder the possibility of rescue, but they realize they have concealed their whereabouts so effectively that hope seems futile. Joseph finds himself compelled to sign the warning, after which a safe materializes before them in an instant. Recalling the notebook, he opens it using the numbers inscribed within. Inside, he discovers a tape recorder and a note instructing him to say something and then close the door to establish a connection. Following the directions, Joseph complies, and a minute later, upon replaying the recording, he hears an unfamiliar voice. The stranger informs them that they are not meant to be on the farm and is aware of the money. Sydney proposes to share a portion with him to facilitate their escape, but the recording abruptly falls silent. Joseph suspects they are communicating with someone from the future. Sydney mimics her brother's actions as she opens and closes the safe. A voice reemerges, declaring its intention to erase all evidence of their existence in order to maintain the fragile equilibrium of this place's powers. However, Joseph comes to the realization that the strangers must desire something from them, otherwise, they would have been eliminated long ago. The stranger clarifies that their only chance of survival lies in remaining on the farm and eliminating a mysterious visitor who will arrive at an unspecified time in the future. They must dispose of his remains, after which these enigmatic individuals will assist them in returning to their own time. Joseph and Sydney return to the house, where Sydney inspects the closets and refrigerator once more, finding them fully stocked with food and alcohol. She intends to position herself in a manner that allows her to monitor every approach to the house, ensuring they do not miss the visitor's arrival. Sydney is convinced that if they are trapped here, their situation is dire, yet she remains determined to attempt an escape. Joseph proposes establishing a watch schedule and taking shifts while Sydney pours out the alcohol. They conceal their weapons in various hiding spots around the yard and in the mill, with Joseph standing guard as Sydney meticulously searches the house, examining old portraits and photographs on the walls. They then switch roles, with Sydney surveying the grounds. Nearly a year passes, and the brother and sister enjoy every convenience, as the refrigerator consistently supplies them with food. They are able to maintain their cleanliness and reside in comfort. Sydney continues her exploration of old newspapers, magazines, and documents she discovers within the house. She views vintage broadcasts and practices with a bull hook, and in the evenings, she builds campfires. One day, she informs her brother that she has found a box of photographs at the mill, which revealed to her that the images displayed in the foyer do not depict the original owners of the farm. The history of this land, relocated here by unknown forces, encompasses events up to the Korean War of 1955. After that point, there is no evidence of anyone having lived here. One of the individuals in the photographs, a naval officer, apparently died here around that same time, allegedly from a fall down the stairs. She suspects that this was roughly when those who took control of the property with their technology first arrived, making the house their own by installing electricity, heating, and even television. For some reason, they utilized this period of inactivity, and when the siblings entered, they became trapped. However, this does not resolve their questions. Joseph grows frustrated, attempting to convince Sydney that the situation is entirely his fault, even going so far as to blame their parents. He believes that those responsible are indifferent to their plight, acting solely out of capability. No one ever arrives here uninvited, leaving them with the grim prospect of a slow demise. A conflict erupts between the siblings, as Joseph is convinced that Sydney does not believe him and thinks he is prepared to abandon her. Nevertheless, he soon regains his composure, and they reconcile. They proceed downstairs to the foyer, where Sydney watches television while Joseph examines the identical tattoos they both bear, a reminder of their family. Their wait continues, and Joseph attempts to reach out to the strangers once more, but the tape recorder remains silent. He pleads for any sign, as he is weary from the uncertainty, yet the tape remains blank. A mysterious visitor arrives at the farm one day, observing Sydney through binoculars before advancing toward the house with the intent to shoot her. However, Joseph notices the threat and shouts a warning to his sister, causing the bullet to miss its target. The hooded figure then turns his weapon on Joseph, who narrowly escapes by ducking back into the house. The siblings begin to search for the intruder but are unable to locate him. Joseph decides to circle the house in an attempt to access a hidden stash of weapons in the field. The stranger fires at him again, prompting Joseph to retreat into the house, where he is soon confronted by the hooded men. Later, Sydney hears music emanating from the field and discovers someone with a tape player playing their mother's song. Joseph lies incapacitated at her feet, and as Sydney approaches the field, a confrontation ensues, resulting in her being injured. She takes refuge in the house, tends to her wounds, and finds that the closet is once again blocked. In a fit of anger, she attempts to break down the door, but a warning appears on the board advising against such actions. Simultaneously, a safe materializes in the room. Meanwhile, Joseph, with his legs bound, regains consciousness in a church. Sydney insists on leaving with her brother as she reopens the safe connection. The strangers warn her that if she breaks down the door, both she and Joseph will perish. At that moment, the visitor notices Joseph attempting to reach for his pistol and strikes him. The stranger asserts that they cannot allow the visitor to escape, while Sydney mentions her mother's music, but they insist that the visitor is not her mother. The visitor, unable to speak for reasons unknown, writes a note directing Joseph to reach out to the strangers and assure them that he and Sydney have met the requirement by eliminating the intruder. Sydney is currently being persuaded to reveal all she knows about the visitor, after which they promise to clarify why they are certain she is not her mother. Suddenly, the connection is severed. In the church, the visitor instructs Joseph to confirm the intruder's death on the tape recorder. Joseph states that the body is outside, that he is injured, and if the strangers can get in touch with Sydney, they will present the body together. Upon receiving this information, Sydney sets out to rescue him. Meanwhile, the visitor, through writing and communication, informs Joseph that he is searching for the individual responsible for his family's murder. At that moment, Sydney makes a noise outside, prompting the visitor to rush out, leading to a shootout in which the visitor escapes. Joseph manages to seize his pistol and free himself, while Sydney pursues the stranger into the house. A struggle ensues, during which Sydney injures him, knocking him down, and attempts to unmask him. After a fierce struggle, she finally removes his mask and recognizes her now adult daughter, Steph. As she processes this revelation, Joseph bursts in and shoots the visitor. In an attempt to protect Steph, Sydney is struck by the bullet instead. As her brother mourns his dying sister, Steph escapes through the pantry. Left alone, Joseph informs the stranger on the tape recorder that the visitor has departed. He buries Sydney and, following the given instructions, waits at the mill. He is then transported to an unfamiliar location where he meets the stranger from the tape recorder and a woman who demand information about the visitor, but Joseph has no knowledge to provide. It is said that he and Sydney violated the established rules and will face erasure. In a moment of desperation, Joseph pleads for one final opportunity, expressing regret for his aspirations of a more favorable outcome. The strangers consent and return him to the initial day at the cafe, where he discloses to Sydney that he has experienced this cycle numerous times, unable to avert her untimely demise. He informs her that the only way to halt this tragic fate is for her to take his life immediately, seize the money, and return to her daughter. Sydney then shoots Joseph and escapes as the sound of police sirens draws near. The film presents a peculiar and even absurd narrative, leaving the audience anticipating an explanation or resolution to this strange paradox, which ultimately does not materialize. Questions regarding the identity of those orchestrating these events, their intentions, and the reason behind the necessity for the heroine to kill her own daughter remain unresolved enigmas. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure.